investigative reporting mind, and I turned this phenomenon around from every angle, and I could not understand how it was made by humans. And so I conclude, and it does, like I think we talked about this too, the way that Nazism feels different from Stalin's massacre. Stalin was just a horrible human being doing evil things, right? In a
Mm-hmm.
kind of brutal way. But the Nazis had a kind of satanic glamour, right? It's a different feeling. And that's why people are so fascinated by the horrors of the Nazi period, because of this metaphysical level of evil, right? So moving back to our time, what I was seeing around me, I couldn't explain it. And I especially couldn't explain this kind of mass hallucination and the anti-human quality of many of the directives, many of the policies. They seem to be about targeting the family, targeting closeness, targeting dance and
Mm-hmm.
breathing and love and music and all the things that make us human, targeting free will, targeting the body, which is made in the image of God, according to my tradition. So I did conclude that I have to conclude it seems that there's some metaphysical evil that can do more impressive things than human beings can do in the bad direction. And that as a consequence, I had to believe that there was also kind of proof of God as a result, because it must be in
Mm-hmm.
pursuit of something. That metaphysical level of evil, that intentionality, that scale had to be directed at something oppositely, good and massive and redemptive.
Otherwise, how could you account for it?
Yeah,
I
and I
guess
have
that's
no,
the
I,
point.
I, I have no kind of material proof, and I really want to, like talking about God is always very treacherous, and there's a reason I haven't wanted to, right? Because
Of
people
course,
exert power and authority in the name of
they do.
God.
Religion has been used in that way many, many times. There's absolutely no doubt about it. And yet, at the same time, our way of talking and thinking in public, in our culture, you say the past 50, 60 years, maybe the past couple hundred years, at the elite level at least, we are afraid to introduce the question of what kind of malevolence is at work in human societies or sometimes in the human soul. We're afraid to ask that question. We're afraid to ask what kind of supreme good might be so good that that malevolence would be wielded against it, because we're afraid that if we introduce those topics, then we and others will just obsess constantly about them. So, intellectually speaking, for example, and I'm speaking here as a Christian myself, um, the fact that there is supernatural causality at work in the world doesn't negate the fact that there's natural causality at work in the world. That there natural causality seems to account for the vast majority of phenomena, actually, but that doesn't prove that there's no supernatural causality. And when I allow for the possibility of both kinds of causality, I'm not obsessing about the one, actually.
Yeah.
Um, there may be a certain kind of moral and spiritual naivete at work in Enlightenment rationalism or even in postmodernism. It seems naive to me to refuse to consider the immaterial spiritual sources of both good and evil. That's my thought.
Yeah, well, especially since millions of people have had metaphysical experiences throughout history. It does seem to be closing the door on an aspect of human experience. But, again, I just want to stress, to me, the only posture that I personally feel I should take when I talk about God or the divine or the metaphysical is one of absolute humility and
Yes. Mm-hmm.
confession of unknowing, because I have no idea, and I never want to speak for anyone but myself. But for myself, I can tell you, and I do feel compelled to start saying this. I don't, just like I couldn't figure out how an evil of the scale could be created by humans, I also looked at our situation. I do this like every day. I've been fighting this fight for 2 years now. And I looked at kind of our resources as humans, the platform I have, the platform other people have, our human organizations, money, fame, activism. And I concluded that humans alone can't get out of this. And that literally I am metaphorically, because I'm Jewish, so we don't get on our knees, but I'm metaphorically, on my knees, because I think at this point it maybe we are in an existential fight between good and evil at this moment in history, and maybe we do need God's help. And I'm not telling anyone
Mhm.
what to do, but I personally feel like I need God's help to get out of this because I can't get out of it by myself.
I have some comments coming to me from participants. Here's one directly related. Isn't belief in God a harbinger or a bringer of tyranny to human societies?
It certainly can be. I mean, thank you for that question. It's so important. It has been. I mean, again, I'm Jewish. We've been hounded throughout the centuries by people who were sure God wanted them to kill us off or,
Right.
take our stuff or hurt us into, you know, bad places, or inquisition us. So it's scary. I mean, to even talk about it because the first use, and I don't think this is very godly. I think it's kind of satanic. But the first thing people tend to do with the power and authority of talking about God is, you know, sort of press their own advantage and subjugate other people.
Absolutely.
So I think if we're going to, so it doesn't have to, right? But it's like money, or it's like anything that's neutral. It
Hmm.
can, or not neutral. It can be used for good. It can be used for evil. Anything that's powerful, right, can be used for good or used for evil. Um, I I'm not telling anyone else what to do, but I agree that a very careful care needs to be held in one's heart when one starts to talk about these things, so that one isn't coercing or browbeating, or one is literally only exploring and sharing, and even that, with great tentativeness and hesitation. But you know what? Atheism can be used for tyranny, right? Tyranny.
I think it
Tyrants,
has been deployed for tyranny.
yeah, well, both have, right? Tyrants are going to tyrant.
Both, both.
Yes, and they will do it in the name of whatever sells it.
Right. One might even argue that while belief in God can be used as an rationalization for tyranny, belief in God can also be a buttress against tyranny. And we've seen both of those. I mean, one of the great things that I think religion in the West has contributed is a place to stand where you can question the supremacy claims of Caesar or of any governmental authority. If in fact there is a God, then there's a place to stand to question the supreme authority claims of the state or of anybody wielding power.
For sure, and it's the same reason I think that there's such a war on the family and of breaking parents, um, primary decision making about children. I'm so struck that churches and synagogues were shuttered for almost 2 years. I mean, a year into the pandemic, I had to leave my synagogue because they just wouldn't meet.
Wow.
They had, and this was synagogues across the region. They had
Right.
public health experts on the board not letting them reopen. And I guess I just want to agree with you, Graham, that whether it's God or whether it's family or whatever higher meaning one's life has, those are the things that do give individuals the somewhere to stand to resist tyranny historically.
Hmm.
Um,
Yeah.
let me,
And in fact,
sorry, go ahead.
well, talking about these things together, you and I and others, like us, wrestling through both the risks and the insights provided by some of the historic religions that are around us and still living with us. We need to talk about these things so precisely so as to figure out how to avoid the downside of the supernatural and spiritual dimensions of life that really exist. And we're silly to think that there's no spiritual dimension to human life. There always has been. So we need to talk about it and figure out how to avoid the downsides. If we don't talk about it, we're not armed intellectually.
What do you mean the downsides? What are the downsides?
Well, I mean, the misuse of spirituality, the misuse of religious claims that we were talking about a minute ago. I mean, it's too easy to say, oh, well, anybody who talks to us about God, that he's just a naive, silly. That's one way of dealing with it, but that introduces other risks. So a complex, high-level consideration of these issues actually can prevent both the misuse of religious claims and the misuse of anti-religious claims.
I
The
mean,
subject needs to be on the table.
I hope so. There isn't a good track record of talking about God without, in the next breath, beating someone up. But
Right.
I guess for me, if one is going to do that, I mean, I really want to validate the risks, right?
Right.
Especially to religious minorities, because your God, Graham, may not be my God. And
Mhm.
I guess what I'd like to say is that this could be like, if we do it right, an incredibly hopeful moment if we survive it, because just like I hope we emerge from this tyranny with a sense of individual choice and bodily integrity intact, I would like to have a discourse in which when I talk about God or you talk about God, we're only talking about our own experience. We're not then saying, this has to be your God, and you have to agree with me about what I say God is, because that would solve a lot of problems, right?
Well, I certainly get the impression from talking with you, even this last little bit here, that you and I, at least, and maybe a lot of people we know, could have these conversations, both about the public issues as well as spiritual issues, in a way that could be fruitful and not just a dead end.
I mean, I think those of us who are called to need to, because everything we're doing isn't working, right? Everything we were told would save us isn't going to save us. All of the society we've built is imploding. All the institutions we've trusted are falling apart, and but I feel like it has to be. It's so important that it's organic. Like I don't want to
Oh, yeah.
ever, drag someone into a discussion about
Right.
spiritual.
No dragging.
No dragging, exactly.
Yeah, right.
That said, I do want to talk about like one real kind of thorny thing
Okay.
in this journey.
Okay, go for it.
So I'm Jewish, as I keep saying, I'm Jewish, right? But I really like Jesus, right? And I really like Jesus as a rabbi and a teacher, and to me, he was the model activist and and the model teacher, right? And so much of what I think about when I think like, how are we supposed to survive this? How are we supposed to live? You know, I get answers from his life, and respectfully to Christians, I don't mean his life as inscribed in the theological construction that became the Catholic Church or the Christian establishment. I mean the kind of raw historical Jesus, the kind of redacted historical Jesus who taught people and served people and was unbelievably brave in facing down tyrannies of a scale that would even dwarf what we're looking at today. So I just want to share that because it's super uncomfortable for me. I'm not a Christian, and yet I'm a Jew with a really passionate sense that I follow Jesus as my rabbi. So that is like a weird place to be. And maybe that's one reason I'm so scared of
Right.
the media kind of labeling that people tend to do when they talk about God, because I've struggled with the fact that I don't fit in any camp now because of this very deep love I have for this rabbi. And
Well, he didn't seem to fit in camps and labels either, did he?
He did not.
Yeah.
Indeed.
Wow. Okay. You and I have found something to keep talking about for sure. And I'm sure our friends appreciate that too. We're going to stop here. It's always good to stop when you're on a roll rather than after your roll is over. Okay. Thank you for getting us on a roll, Naomi. We would love to continue the conversation. We thank all of our friends around the country who've come to us through our various platforms, including from Naomi's own dailyclout.io, which I invite you to visit. And thank you for joining us, friends. Thank you for joining us, Naomi. We'll come back again to Independent Conversations.
Such an honor to be included, and thank you so much also for showcasing my work and for including me in your conversation.
Oh, for sure. Okay. Take care, everybody. Thanks, Naomi. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Chair will now recognize the gentlelady from Wyoming, Ms. Hageman, to lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance.
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
I would ask the press to maybe clear out of the middle here so we can see our witnesses and proceed with the hearing. We welcome everyone to today's hearing on victims of violent crime in Manhattan. We are joined today by some of our colleagues who would like to participate in the hearing. Ms. Stefanik, Mr. Goldman, whose district we're in, and Mr. Espaillat. Per an agreement with Mr. Nadler and without objection, these members will be permitted to participate in today's hearing for only the purpose of asking questions of the witnesses. Each side will have an additional 5 minutes for these members to question the witnesses. The chair now recognizes himself for an opening
Mr.
statement.
Chairman, I have a unanimous consent request.
Gentleman from Florida is recognized.
Mr. Chairman, I said unanimous consent. I understand Mr. Alba may be utilizing the services of an interpreter today, and so that the interpretation time would occur off the clock so that we might be able to ask questions of Mr. Alba.
Without objection, so ordered. While we're speaking of time, I know we have to be back in the Capitol tonight for some votes, so the chair will probably be pretty darn strict with the 5-minute rule, but we want to make sure all our witnesses get their full 5 minutes and members get their time to question. Today's hearing is about the administration of justice and keeping communities safe, something that has always been a central focus of the House Judiciary Committee. Our witnesses today have felt the effects of crime up close and personal. They've been victimized by a justice system that cares more about political correctness than punishing the criminals who've harmed them and harmed their family. We thank them for being here and sharing their story. Their stories are emblematic of a city that's lost its way when it comes to fighting a crime and upholding the law. As we all know, fairness under the law is a bedrock principle of American democracy. In this country, justice is supposed to be blind, regardless of race, religion, or creed. However, here in Manhattan, the scales of justice are weighed down by politics. For the district attorney, justice isn't blind. It's about looking for opportunities to advance a political agenda, a radical political agenda. Rather than enforcing the law, the DA is using his office to do the bidding of left-wing campaign funders. He's taken a soft-on-crime approach to the real criminals. One of Mr. Bragg's first actions upon taking office in January of 2022 was to put out a memo that directed his assistant district attorneys not to prosecute certain crimes, including trespassing and resisting arrest. The memo also stated that armed robberies should not be prosecuted as felonies. Instead, they were to be considered as misdemeanor larceny unless someone was shot during the course of the robbery. Thank goodness, after a backlash from police groups and the public, Mr. Bragg agreed to prosecute some robberies as felonies, but left the rest of the memo in place. The president of NYPD Detectives Endowment Association said, quote, "Bragg gives criminals the roadmap to freedom from prosecution and control of our streets. In Bragg's Manhattan, you can resist arrest, deal drugs, obstruct arrest, and even carry a gun to get away with it. And guess what happened under this new policy? More crime. In 2022, Mr. Bragg's first year as district attorney, New York City saw a 23% surge in major crimes. Felony assaults rose 13%, robberies spiked 26%, burglaries in New York City went up 23%, grand larcenies were up 26%, and auto theft increased 32%. Transit crime surged nearly 30%. Imagine that. You leave criminals on the street, you get more crime. Patrick Lynch, the president of the Police Benevolent Association, said, "Police officers don't want to be sent out to enforce laws that the district attorneys won't prosecute. There are already too many people who believe that they can commit crimes, resist arrest, interfere with police officers, and face zero consequences." We should take a minute here to thank our brave men and women in law enforcement. We got a number of them right here in this building. Thank you for what you do. In the last few years, police have been villainized and harassed by the left and even defunded. These men and women put their lives on the line every day, every single day, and they deserve our deepest gratitude. But that's not what they're getting from left-wing district attorneys here and around the country. Police do their job, they do the hard work, they go out on the streets, they catch the bad guys, and then the DAs don't do theirs, don't do their job. Instead, they let bad guys roam the street. As we'll hear today, repeat offenders are plaguing New York City. On April 6, 2023, NYPD Commissioner Sewell said, "Recidivism is the undertow pulling against everything we're doing to keep our city safe. It is counterproductive to public safety and frankly, is a perpetual carousel of police resources. Astonishingly, Sewell said that 327 individuals were arrested more than 6,000 times for retail theft. Think about that. 327 individuals responsible for 6,000 retail thefts, what we used to call stealing, taking someone else's property. Each person arrested on average 20 times. Maybe we wouldn't have had that problem if they'd arrested them and kept them in jail after the first, the second, or maybe even the 19th time. Average of 20 times. Given the record of crime, the record level of crime we are seeing around the country, our plan this Congress has been to include field hearings in some of our greatest cities, to analyze and highlight how soft on crime policies hurt families, hurt communities, hurt small business owners. We believe it's important to hear from victims and their families who simply want to share their stories, hoping that it will help create change so other families don't have to suffer like they did. What better place to start than New York City, where videos of violent, senseless attacks appear almost daily, and where the DA of Lower Manhattan earned a reputation for caring more about the perpetrators of crime than the victims. Thanks again to all our brave witnesses for being here. And thanks to the NYPD, the Capitol Police, and the Federal Protective Services for all they do to keep people safe. And now recognize the ranking member, Mr. Nadler, for an opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Let me be very clear. We are here today in Lower Manhattan for one reason and one reason only. The chairman is doing the bidding of Donald Trump. Committee Republicans designed this hearing to intimidate and deter the duly elected District Attorney of Manhattan from doing the work his constituents elected him to do. They have demanded access to the inner workings of an ongoing criminal case, information to which they know they are not entitled. They have subpoenaed a witness who used to work for the district attorney, whom they know cannot answer their questions. And they have earned a lawsuit that risks future congressional oversight as a result. They have perpetuated